So thank you all for joining us today. We are Furries at Berkeley, and with the support of the ASUC Multicultural Initiative Fund, we are thrilled to welcome to campus a live saber-toothed tiger, and an extremely talented and successful saber-tooth at that. Here we have Dr. David Veneron, otherwise known as Spartacus, an inventor, entrepreneur, biochemist, author of numerous field-advancing articles on medicine and medical tech, founding editorial board member of the Journal of Biomedical Optics, and a former professor at Stanford University in the schools of medicine and physics. If you're wearing a smartwatch right now, chances are you're looking at the inventor of that technology, the green light heart rate sensor. Though Spotty's inventions also include co-authoring the first in vivo imaging of light-emitting genes, which became Xenogen and spawned the field of bioluminescent imaging, and the multispectral wearable optical sensor for tracking hemoglobin and hydration levels. Last year, Spotty won a Lifetime Achievement Award in Biomedical Optics from the International Society for Optics and Photonics. Spotty is also a furry and fursuiter. For those that don't know, the furry fandom is a fandom centered around the appreciation of anthropomorphic animals, and it features all kinds of creative self-expression, from art to storytelling to making and performing in fursuits. Perhaps because of this emphasis on creativity and care, it can also be a space where many who identify as LGBTQ+ and neurodivergent feel like they can actually be who they are without having to pass as quote normal, unquote, or neurotypical. Since furry has long been the target of bullying and certain degrees of controversy, folks like Spotty are more than just inventors. To furries, Spotty show that you can be successful and embrace your fluffy side. That thinking and living outside the box can be a boon rather than a limitation. As Spotty said in an interview, people tell me I just light up when in a fursuit, and I can even focus my mind better. People notices I glance to the side when I listen. Sorry, nobody notices when I glance to the side or struggle to catch my gaze. And I even listen better in fursuit. Now that I think walking around in character creates distance, it's exactly the opposite. Fursuiting breaks down social barriers. Last but not least, we would like to acknowledge the contribution and help of the Department of Molecular and Cell Biology, as well as the Department of Bioengineering in making this talk possible. Without further ado, please help us in welcoming Spotty.
Go Bears! The last time I talked at the faculty club here, when it was announced I was from Stanford, everyone booed, so you're a great audience. I titled this subtitle of this talk, you're finding your path from 0 to 1 to 1 billion. And you kind of know what 0 to 1 is. It's making something exist that didn't exist just before that. But then there's the problem of taking it from 1 and getting into people's pods. That's sort of the domain of marketing or sales. And it's an essential part of getting a product into people's hands. So there's 2 stories here. Let's see if I can do this. First, a warning. This is a medical talk. Nothing grows, no one in pain, but there are people who are. See if I can do this right. Perfect. So there's multiple arcs to this story, and there's 2 really important ones. And I've sort of put it together kind of like Looper. First you'll hear it from the human side, then you'll hear it from understanding neurodivergence. Then we go through a 3rd time and hear it as furry. And as we sort of interleave these stories, life gets more interesting and more rich and more fun. So let's talk about the 2 arcs here. My favorite poet, Mary Oliver, said, "I do know how to pay attention, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day." Well, she's a poet, she should do that. And she said, "Tell me, what else should I have done? And then tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I think that's really, if you had a thing that has driven me all my life, it's what do you want to do? Not what you're supposed to do, not what is everyone telling you to do, But what do you want to do? Because if you can do that and follow that path, whether it be science or politics or art, teaching, protesting, whatever, you find that path that makes you happy, you'll have a really good life. Now, what did I always want to be? From the time I was like, I can remember, 3, 4, 5, I wanted to be an inventor. We see inventors in movies. We know of them as fun and exciting, whether it be Marie Curie doing radium, whether it be Albert Einstein figuring out things and how they work, or Alexander Graham Bell. I wanted this, Watson, come in here, I need you moment. I craved that. And that's what I wanted to do. But if I imagined what I was like, I would say I was more like Doc Brown. That was my idea of a crazy, fun, eccentric inventor. And it actually happened. Jump ahead 20, 30 years. Here I am at Stanford, and we put these glowing light bulbs into cells. We're using them as light bulbs to track cancer in the body. And we can do it with ones of cells instead of millions or billions of cells. So that aha moment did come. And when I was sitting in the lab watching these plates of glowing bacteria we just made, we went into a dark room for the first time. We turned off the lights and we saw nothing. And then after a couple minutes, the glow came. And I just yelped. I was so excited. There were a million things that could have gone wrong with that. A million reasons. It might not work, but it worked. And at that point, I knew we had this new tool that was going to be able to answer questions that no one had answered before. That was super exciting. But there's another loop to this. And that's this. Arc 2, understanding yourself. Picture in the plane with the first seat head is me flying back from seeing friends a few weeks ago. I'm flying on a plane in a head, and I'm comfortable with that. But that was not the way childhood was. Childhood was more like this picture from Fantastic Mr. Fox. It was more like Ash, trying to fit in at school, trying to fit in at sports, and here's the bully who comes over and says, "You're different." Everyone knew I was different. I knew I was different. I wasn't out in the field playing every day. And they would apply words like weird or nerd. But they were never really positive words. It was more of an expression of how I was different. And the thing is, I really didn't know how different I was until I got to be an adult. I mean, I assumed that nobody knew the names of their friends in their classroom after spending an elementary class for 300 days together. Everyone else knew their names. I didn't realize that. I thought differently. I dreamt differently. What I wanted to do in my spare time was different. And it's understanding that gap that really made life wonderful. So I'm going to put that into part of what we talk about. So let's go back to the beginning. This time, in human form, doing inventions. This is my first invention. I was a medical student, and I wanted to try and see if I could help people forgetting to take their medication. I heard, blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. It's all about how compliant you are with your medication. And if you don't take it right, the medicine doesn't work if you don't take it. So I'm thinking I'll put a microprocessor in this cap that closes the pill bottle, and everyone will be compliant with their medication. So I pitched people. I got General Electric to invest. I got Corning Medical to invest. I got like $2 million. I was like 22 years old. And we made this thing. And then we went to medical conferences to try and sell it. And no one was interested. My assumption is that everyone's excited about new things, but a lot of people are just happy with what they're doing now. They don't want to do something new or different. They don't want to change their ways. And more importantly, I was coming in as an outsider. Isn't this a cool new thing that you can now use? And they're like, why? Well, it's obvious why. It's like, we don't want to change. So coming on the outside, I realized that it's not just about the device. It's not about having cool schematics and a great idea. You have to tell a story. And if you think about it, stories are what we do every single day. We tell stories to our families. We tell stories to the people that work with us. We tell stories to investors. We tell stories to our kids. We tell stories to people who we want to work with. We tell stories to people who are trying to get something new done. If you don't tell that story, no one hears about it. No one wants to use it because they don't know why they should use it. And really what it comes down to is you need to really make it something that someone wants to use, or else it goes away. So this one actually failed. Even though it's a really, really cool idea, and the technology worked, no one used it. So let's go back to the beginning again. Talk about what school was like. When I imagined numbers, I thought of them in colors. I assumed all my friends did. When people went out to play on sports, I couldn't figure out why they were doing it. And it took me until I was an adult to realize I don't understand why most people do anything that they do. That's a pretty broad statement. I don't understand why most quote-unquote normal people want to do the things that they do. It's just very foreign to me. I just assumed everyone was the same, as we all do. And then, of course, you go to high school and everyone assumes they're different. And then most people find their tribe. And I didn't. What I found was every time I talked to people about what I was thinking, what I wanted to do, they didn't understand it. It was too far away from their machines to understand it. So I focused on the things that made me happy. I read a lot instead of played sports. I thought a lot instead of going out and doing things after school with others. So I had this rich intellectual life from a very young age, but it wasn't with others. Inside, though, my head was different. When I think of numbers, 2 is always blue, and 3 is orange, and 5 is green. It's kinesthesia. When I try and sit still, I can't sit still. I get up here, I won't stop moving, right? And it was even worse when I was a child. I had dreams that were lucid, so I did my homework in my sleep, and I woke up knowing the answers to all the math problems. I just wrote them down. I did all these things that other people didn't do, and the inside life was beautiful. So I studied hard, I got into college, I got into medical school, I got into postgraduate education, I did physiology, postdoc fellowships, I did biochemistry, I became a doctor. All of that was because what was happening inside was amazing, but I wasn't able to express it on the outside. And so in the end, I wasn't really that happy. Having words to describe what you feel matter. I didn't have words for what I was experiencing. Now, of course, we'll say you're on the spectrum. This book by San Franciscan Steve Silverman talks about the autism spectrum and the Asperger spectrum as sort of being a different way of thinking, not a dysfunctional way of thinking, just different. You're neurodiverse, you're neuroatypical, right? But not wrong. And when I thought back on my childhood, all of the things that people saw, most of it was kind of negative. So let's look at the list of things that go along inside someone's head who's on the spectrum, like me. We're inattentive when we're bored. I mean, a teacher will start a lecture, 2 seconds in I'm bored, I'm out of my seat, I'm in the principal's office. It's not a positive thing. I don't see the boxes. It's not that I ignore the boxes, or I think outside the boxes. I don't understand why people have boxes, or why they're so important. Why is consistency important to some people? I have slow calculation and reaction times. Which means when someone asks me a question, I stare at them for 30 seconds, and they move on. It's not that I am not listening, it's that I'm still thinking about it. I'm dyslexic. People don't like my texts when I get upset or excited because they can't read them. And I'm disfluent, meaning that I substitute words or can't find the right words at the right time. Eye contact, avoidance of eye contact. When I think, I stare down. And that bothers a lot of people, so the conversations stop. I'm completely unaware of situations. If someone is unhappy with what I'm presenting, I actually don't notice. And I'm not sports bally. I mean, I know you score points, and you drive a team to score more points, and the one that scores more points wins. And that is my understanding of every single gaming thing. I work with someone from the Florida Jaguars. They're actually a partner in one of our startups. And it's like, the Jaguars is a team. And they look at me, it's like, how do you not know that? It's like, it's a team in what sport? And they're like, how are you not aware of that? It doesn't register in my head. And that means I'm unaware of major social cues. And I'm distracted by noise and touch. Well, if you put words to this, you can start talking about it. Words are really important. Helen Keller, when she first had the word water written out and described to her, and she understood that word was a concept. It meant cool water, it meant getting your thirst quenched, it meant a thing outside of her. It totally changed her world. And hearing the sort of words that are applied to people sort of neurotypical on the spectrum gave me knowledge of myself that I didn't have. What's interesting, and Steve Silverman points this out really beautifully, is that you can look at these things as deficits in some situations, but there's superpowers in others. So for example, I'm inattentive, but when I get hyper-focused on something that's interesting, I can work 36 hours straight. I don't care if I sleep, I don't care if I eat, I'm going to solve that algorithm until it's done. That's a superpower. It just really needs to be presented as such, and then other people start to understand it. Same thing, if I don't see the boxes, it means I'm really good at thinking outside of the box. If I'm slow at synthesis, it means I actually take time to have much sort of deeper pattern recognition and start seeing first order and second order relationships and data, and they pop out in colors in my head. If I'm dyslexic, it means I'm a careful reader. I remember almost every word that I've ever read. I can go to my physics book in high school and pull out the graph with an equation and remember and write down that equation. So again, it's all balanced. Avoiding eye contact means I can think about anything, anywhere. I'm not distracted. And I'm aware of social obstacles. And social cues means I'm willing to dive into new things. For example, if someone says, in suit, get up on the stage, and someone calls me up at Shoreline Amphitheater, and there's 25,000 people watching, I will dance with them on stage. I got to dance with Jared Leto on stage at Shoreline for a long time, and it was amazing. People said, why did you go up there? It's like, why not? I just don't seem to see those as barriers, and it means that I'm willing to jump in and try things. So the last one is that I'm distracted by noise and touch and wind. Well, I'm fursuit ready, because when you go inside a fursuit, the world gets quieter. I only see a tiny little circle of people down here, and the air temperature, the wind, doesn't reach me at all. And I found that in here, I can really, really think. And so by having words, by having understanding, I was able to move the needle from being, this is why you're weird and strange and nerdy, to, oh my God, look at the things you can create in Silicon Valley. And that has been an amazing experience. It all comes down to language. So now let's go back to the beginning of furry. Now people will make beautiful suits like this. I actually started making them myself because there weren't fursuit makers back then. This is my first fur head that I made. It was just paper mache. And my first suit looked like someone made the head and I hand painted the suit. I look and I go, oh my God, that is just so awful. But behind that, it was transformative. The ability to be in this suit and out dancing. I started making them for when I was going out dancing in high school and college. And I found that I was no longer afraid to be on the dance floor. I danced, and people liked the way I was dancing, and they would join in. And that continues even today. I was out dancing at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Because I was really enjoying myself, people joined in. And it becomes a way of meeting people because they see you enjoying what you're doing, and they come and join. So that has been a very sort of interesting transformation. Now, there are many people who say, don't mix your furry and your work, but I'll show you that this really was an amazing mix for me. So what do we have? We have language, neurotribes, language, Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder language, but furries have language too. We have words to describe our relationships. We have words to describe how we play and what we're doing, and whether we're suiting with just the head. That's called poodling, right? There's all sorts of words. Once you have a language, you have a shared communication. You have a culture. And a culture is really a tribe. And so what I found was in furry, I finally found my tribe. I no longer feel that I am not understood. I no longer feel that I am separate. I'm doing amazing things, and I'm still happy doing that. But personally, I feel appreciated. And that has been something I never expected, based on childhood, to ever be able to say. So this has been the furry journey for me. And I tend to think of people who are furries as, because a lot of us don't see boxes, we're pushing the #1 Amazon series. Cartoon is directed and illustrated and written by furries. Hasbin Hotel. Beastars came out a few years before. It affected a lot of furries and to see themselves in the media, and it was commercial success. Even if you get into the really techie side, the server software known as Kubernetes just had a furry version released as a way of saying thank you to all the furry programmers who contributed, because there are a lot of them who actually are furries in that field. So this is actually called Kubernetes, and it's version 1.30 that just came out. I think in some ways we're kind of the new Illuminati, not elitist, but what I mean is we have this connection from people across industries. I go to parties and I'll see some large Silicon Valley CFO, and we'll just talking, and it's not these rarefied, say, Elon Musk parties, but these are just furry house parties. We span all the spectrum. There's no test to say you're furry. So you meet people from all walks of life. I don't do that in the tech world. I don't meet people who aren't lawyers or engineers, multiple college degrees, top of their line. But I meet artists now, and I meet people who make things with their hands, who make fursuits, like the stage designers out of Baltimore and Colorado and New York. People that create things that are artistic and creative, and I know them. That wouldn't happen sort of in the normal walled world. So now we're ready to come back. Think of, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, inventor, scientist, doctor, furry. There's a sort of a saying, you think about it from Ghostbusters, don't cross the lightsabers because something bad's going to happen, right? This is what happens when you cross the sabers. When you put all of it together and you don't put boundaries in between, really interesting things start to happen. So let's go back through inventions now. This is me as a neonatal dog. Early, young, furry. I'm leaning over a 500-gram baby. And a 500-gram baby has 40 cc's of blood, so 3 teaspoons? That's like nothing. Remember, a hemorrhage is a loss of 10% of your blood. So a teaspoon is a hemorrhage for a newborn baby. How do you monitor these people non-invasively? And I remember the Life magazine spread out of the mid to late 1960s, which showed fetuses in the womb. At ages, by the way, they can now survive and do well. Then it was way before survivability. And what everyone knew is red light goes through tissue. And that was manifest in things like pulse oximeters that came out in the 1980s. But how do you actually study this? So I asked, who should I go to study non-invasive things? They said, this guy, Britton Chance, old emeritus professor. He was like 70, mid-70s when I started working with him. He was one of the co-inventors of MRI. He's one of the founding members of the MRI Society, founding 12 members. He also had a gold medal in the Olympics, sort of the old classic, just good at everything. And I went to his lab and I said, when we're here, he said, great, take this bowl of yeast and go to Mike Maris's lab down the hall and study it. See, he thought I was actually a high school student who had just wandered in and was looking for summer work. And so I worked for a week because, social things don't bother me. Sure, I'll go to the lab and I'll try something I know nothing about without any worries. And I came back and showed my dad and said, by the way, I'm a physician at Children's Hospital. I'd like to work with you. We developed this great relationship. One of the people he put me in touch with was this woman, one of the first female ICU doctors in the country. She was one of the first neonatologists in the country. And she would take me to the bedside, and I'd look in at a patient, she'd say, stop, don't go in, what do you see? She was really an amazing clinician. She had this insight that you could actually just look and figure things out. Well, what do I do? I'm really good at hyperfocus. I'm really good at pulling out facts that I've seen and heard, and I'd say, well, baby's skin's a little stained, they probably had a clamp in their cord, they're on a ventilator, but they don't look sick. I don't think they're septic. I think they probably just had a cord clamp. They're a little bit stressed. They're going to do fine. Their lungs are inflating easily, so they don't have lung disease. They'll be off the ventilator in 6 days. She turned to me and said, that's right. You got this. You didn't do any blood tests. He just looked, and she taught me about observing and the importance of not just accepting what was known. You know, one other person along that line was my father. He was the first person in our family to go to college, Ukraine, immigrant to Canada, and he was drafted in the Korean War from basically finishing college. And they said, no, you know too many sciences, so they stuck him in a MASH unit in Korea with, no medical background at all. And he said what the doctors there taught him is when you listen to the heart, don't put your brain on hold, just think. And that, again, was that attention. And I was really good at that. So I started paying attention, and this is what I saw. If you look at a bruise, you see colors. If only red light got through tissue, you wouldn't see blues and purples. And a yellow jaundiced baby looks yellow because blue light is absorbed. That's the wavelength that's missing to make you look that yellow. And even if you push on the skin, as this person in the bottom corner is doing with a finger, and let go, you can see the blood. You're seeing things that are getting through the skin and back. And if only red light passes through tissue, you wouldn't see that. So this started an interesting investigation. Everyone said don't go down that path. Everyone knows red light doesn't go through tissue. I don't care what you see. And I think of the Robert Frost poem, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Noticing things and stopping and paying attention to them is where every single great discovery that I did came from. Not that I did it all by myself. I stood on the shoulders of those before me. But noticing something. Now, everyone knew you could put genes in bacteria. Genentech did it to make insulin. It was already a thing. But everyone knew the blue light didn't go through tissue, so no one bothered to make these little light bulbs that we put in cells. And very quickly we were able to show we could actually see by eye genes turning on by cameras. And this turned into a system in which you could actually track cancer cells, infection in a body. You could track these light bulbs in a body. This became a system that displaced CAT scan, it displaced MRI, it displaced all sorts of physical tests as a way of developing new cancer drugs. Almost every cancer drug is developed on an optical platform because we could see 10 cells, and an MRI machine needs 1 million to 1 billion cells to show up. Again, it was because we paid attention. So here's another thing we paid attention to. Well, if green light can get through the skin, could it get in and out as well? So we shined light at people, and we asked, where is the signal changing? Meaning, what light's getting in, hitting blood during the pulsation, and changing differently depending whether your heart was beating or between beats. And there's this peak shown by that black arrow. That black arrow is green light. Nobody did that in their laboratories because they knew that was a useless study. But this was the birth. This is a piece of paper in our notebook of when the green light heart rate sensor that's in all your Apple Watches and in all your Google Fitbit watches and all your Garmin devices, this is the day it was invented, when one person had that light on them. Now there's 1 billion people with that. Why did that happen in my lab and not everyone else's? Because everyone else knew this wasn't possible. That's the superpower. Attention to detail. I knew a lot about optics and physics, but I also knew that I'd seen green light go through tissue, and no one else did. So you follow this thing now from 1 unit to 1 billion units. It took a lot of money, like over $1 billion was spent by Apple and Garmin and Fitbit and us. But I was the chief medical officer of the first wearable company, Jawbone. And it started off as this refrigerator size thing on my head. We did all these different colors of light. And we built that little box in the bottom, in center, that could actually measure all these different rainbow colors. And then it went into a band, and ultimately, where it is today, is people are using it to make diagnoses. This is a medically listed class 2 medical device that's able to measure heart rate, respiratory rate, pulse oximetry, the wrist. It was the first one. And it came because we tried things that everyone knew wouldn't work. So that's been the journey. Oops, that one. Just to give you an idea, the first company, Jawbone, was based on a noise-canceling earphone for a rap. And what they found was, as people moved around and they were trying to cancel noise, the biggest noise was steps. Every time someone moved, there was a thump and a crunch and noise. And they could count the steps. They could count how far people went. And so the CEO of that company, which had a noise-canceling headphone, approached me and said, let's build a wearable that's medically accurate. Look at all the things that came out of it. The movement turned into calories, which has turned into prediction of things like, are you getting dementia? Are you getting Parkinson's syndrome? The light and the measurement of heart rate turned into things like arrhythmia detection and hydration. You can look at heat and start measuring when people have cycles. Everyone could, once you started thinking you could actually measure data on people outside of the hospital, this whole field exploded. And now you see there's over 1 billion people monitored right now. And in the next few years, you're going to start to see a lot more medical weight given to this. All because of the observations that we did. This is our team. It looks like cheap tables at a startup. Literally, we raised almost $750 million to make our first band. But this is our team. And these people, they went to Google and Apple, Garmin, went to universities, have professorships. But what's really interesting about this is that nobody cares that I don't look at them or that I look away when they talk to me. And they know I'm a furry. They want to see the pictures of our first sitting in San Francisco every weekend. They want to know where we went. They want to hear about the parties we go to. And they're a really sharp engineering team that balances my ability and not necessarily to interact and explain things. Together, this was a really amazing experience. Everyone sort of accepted each other for who they are. When you look at these are your colleagues and friends. I actually had friends. I actually had people who knew what I did. And I ran around first and did not care. And that experience brings tears to my eyes because it was so unexpected. I love this one in the bottom corner with the jacket slung over the back. That's in front of one of the Sandhill venture groups just before we raised money. I mean, we look like a team out of, I don't know, it's like any movie about Silicon Valley. It's just so typical looking. But I would go out with my team for dinner in Fursuit, right? And don't forget to stop and sort of, eat the roses along the way. These people and the experience I had with them really forged the first real strong friendships that I had. So now I've gone all over the world. I've fursuited in igloos. I've Zoom called in the bottom in a tiger suit. I've danced with Turtleito on stage. I've been, the token animal for Halloween parades. I've flown in fursuit. And I've just walked around city parks and just enjoyed. And now I'm not afraid to do that. And everything that I've had since accepting that part of me has been really, really positive. I'll tell you 2 stories. One is, I was out in fursuit at one of these dinners. A person comes up and says, tell me about the animal costume. So I describe it to him. He asks me what I'm doing, we tell him about the wearables, what we're building, and then I go into the situation room about 6 weeks later at our office and I see his name as an investor. His group in Chicago turned out to be a very large venture firm. And I asked our CEO, what's this guy doing here? He says, oh, he just called us out of the blue and said he wanted to invest. And I said, oh, have I got a story for you guys? So I've actually raised money in First Aid. It's been just a really good topic of conversation. Unexpectedly, I also found love, right? Sitting in the front row is my current partner. You know, having people that accept you as you are is the best way to let down your guard. And the furries, for me, have been such an amazing social group. They're active, there's things happening every night in the Bay Area. There's wild parties, there's beer drinking nights, there's hikes, there's working on cars, there's programming groups. All of these people come together and we function as a unit because in fact we are sort of culturally a tribe. That was such an unexpected place to go. This, by the way, in the bottom corner is my partner and I, Burning Man, after getting covered with dust for several weeks. And this is sort of take-home message. The lesson is be based AF. Do you. Don't be afraid of you. Don't be afraid of what people will think. Find their strengths and explain those strengths. And you can get accepted for almost anything as long as it's kind and positive. And that's what I've learned. I was afraid to talk about the things that were hard for me before. And now we say, don't give that to me. You know what I'm going to do with it. And everyone goes, oh yeah, we'll give that to someone else. And so it's worked out that we share our strengths. I'll tell you just a couple more things and I'll wrap up. This is what we can work on today. We kind of know what the problems are that face the world. It's not having more services that charge us $70 a month for existing, but there's energy, water, climate, food, health, finance, and sort of this generalized intelligence and where that's going to go. For me, I focus on health. Why? Because that's where I have sort of the experience, and that's where I sort of have the insights. I wrote a paper in 2015 that said, if you had all the data in a non-creepy way, and saved in a safe place, and everyone had an internet address, and you collected all that data, you could make them healthy and square off that health curve so they don't get chronic disease at all. It was a little controversial at the time, but I think people are starting to come to this opinion that if you have enough data, and you're not selling it to sell watches, and you're not selling it to make money, but you're using it to manage health, and it's a health company, not a product company, but you could actually begin to change people's lives. And this is where the promise of wearables is right now. I call this thing, the physician, heal thyself. In Latin, I changed to physician, monitor thyself. And that was the paper. It introduced the idea that big data isn't necessarily evil, provided it's in the right hands. And so where does this go? If you think about health risk, many of the genes we express are not expressed because we're genetically predisposed to do it, but they're expressed because of our lifestyle. For example, we eat carbs, and a lot of them, 60-70% of our diet in the US is carbohydrates, but we don't space them out. Carbohydrates go from your gut to your liver, they get stored there and released. If you run out, your body then turns on other pathways. But in America, Western diet, we never run out of carbohydrates. We have a latte in the morning, we have something at lunch, we have a snack, we have a dessert, we have a dinner, we have another dessert, and so you need 12 hours to use up all your carbohydrates. And if you never use them up, you end up getting this pathway called metabolic syndrome. It raises your blood pressure, which leads to heart disease, heart arrhythmias. It raises your glucose, which leads to diabetes. It causes your vessels to age. In fact, if you go down the list of almost all the major diseases we have in this country, the later life chronic diseases, of which, say, a 7-year-old typically has 5 of them, they have at least 1 on average. Those are really caused by lifestyle. The biggest contribution is not what you inherit. The biggest contribution is what you do. But what can wearables measure? They measure what you do. They look at how much are you actually sleeping. How deep is your sleep actually going? How often are you working out? How often are you getting to a certain level of energy? It turns out that reaching those thresholds of energy is what rewrites the genes, the epigenetics that turn on and turn off certain chronic diseases. No matter what you do, you're not going to get chronic heart disease at 20, 25, 30. You're not going to get lifestyle diabetes from that. That's going to happen when you're 40, 50, 60. And it turns out it's all just gene expression. And that can be solved by data. Now, provided it's used in the right way, this is where we think data is useful. I'm reminded of why health? Because if you don't have it, it's everything. 30% of people have a chronic disease. Ask them, what would they pay? What would they give to not have that chronic disease? And stealing from my brightest diamond, you know, if you're healthy, you don't know you're healthy, but if you're not, you know, right? Everyone knows when they're sick. Everyone knows when they're not happy and depressed. When you're not, you don't think about it, but the time to think about it is before these things happen. And if we could get upstream of that, I think that would be the greatest contribution that I could give. And so this is where I'm working. We have a company that actually looks at that. I know that when I monitored a baby and I had every piece of skin monitored, I could make the sickest patients survive. So now we're going to try and do that with wearables. And the company that I'm working at right now, I'm the chief medical officer, I don't run it, but I contribute strategically to it. And this is just a perfect balance of the things I've learned being now translated into health. This is through its second round of funding, and is actually past clinical trials and in use in hospitals. The other area I'm working comes with longevity. It was long thought that because your chronic diseases eventually destroy you, aging is really just a natural thing. It turns out aging is not natural. It's actually programmed in your cells. And if you can tell the cells to change that program, aging stops. And it can be reversed. So two things happened in the 2010s. The first is there was a paper in Cell, which you can look at later. It said that there's really 4 genes and 6 pathways involved in all of aging. Everyone thought it would be hundreds or thousands, but it's 4. And if you actually put these pathways, and that's what they do, they're all nutritional things, like how much glucose are you eating, how much carbohydrates do you ingest, how much protein do you ingest, and what's the maximum exercise level that your body reaches. And by changing those genes, you can actually change aging. Now, it turns out things like Ozempic, the weight loss drug, Wegovy, metformin in diabetes, one of their primary means of action is not addressing the disease. It's reversing the aging clock that we all have. You can actually measure this clock. You can swab your cheek and send it in now for a few $100. It can be done. But it's going to be getting cheaper, and it's going to be getting more available. So that's number one, that you can actually control these genes and change aging. And the second is, you can actually hack that code and move it. And clinical studies have now happened where, with these simple agents that are available, they've moved the aging clock backwards. That's kind of a phenomenal idea. Now, I'm not saying we should live forever, because we're not ready to live forever. But you think about the difference between hundreds of years ago when we lived to 30, and what we do now when we live to 70, 80. We have graduate degrees. We learn more. We care more, in theory, about our place because we have a longer time here. But what will happen when the age gets moved to 120 average or 200 average? Maybe we'll think a little bit more about the resources that we have. We'll take better care of our ground because we're going to be here longer. But certainly we can stop worrying about living for 30 years and then living 40 years sick, because that's not much of an existence if you're forced to have that all the time. So thinking about where that goes, we have a company called More Health. And that's really the end of where I'm going to get to. I'm going to close with one more thought. So I can get there. First, the 4 take-homes sort of find a problem you care about. Because if you care about something, your life is fun. Second, pay attention to clues. And don't look where everyone else is looking. And last, just be you. Understand yourself. and don't be a bystander. And for the last quote, I want to go to this poem that Mary Oliver wrote, and I think this is my mantra for life. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened, full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. And I think that's that's a life well lived. You didn't just visit, you contributed, you did things. That's where we should all aim for. And this is what sort of this multiple loop of understanding led me to, and hopefully this is something useful to sort of think about. But it's really enabled my just magical life as a furry, as a doctor, as an inventor in Silicon Valley, and as a creator of new things that people can use. This has been an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing it, and we're open for questions. Thanks for attending. Stunned silence. Thank you for coming. This is great.
Yeah, and if you have a question that you would rather not ask from everyone, then we can save time.
I actually have, I'll post this. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. These are all my contacts, companies I've worked at, and I'm available on the web for booking. I try and respond to almost everyone that writes to me, so I'm happy to talk my mind. Thank you. And thank you, Berkeley Furs.
We have a question in the audience. First row, yes.
Oh, cool.
I just have a quick question about how the agreement works. It just uses spectroscopy,
Correct.
but how the wavelength, I'm kind of confused because the sensor's only on one side, right? So there isn't a detector, I guess,
Correct.
on the other end.
So let's talk about spectroscopy. Spectroscopy is one of the newer sciences, right?
Yeah.
Bands of light absorbed by substances. And it was originally fingerprints that people saw when they were heating up and doing flake test of elements, when they were first filling out the periodic table. Argon being an inert part of our atmosphere, but 1% of our atmosphere was a bubble sitting in the top of one particular scientist's cask. He would pull out all the nitrogen, he'd pull out all the oxygen, and he shined light through. And there was this thing that didn't react with anything, so he named it argon, meaning lazy. And everyone thought, oh, you're wrong. But you read about this guy, and this Rayleigh, a physicist, he had brilliant ideas and terrible ideas. And when you look at how he went about his discoveries, I'll bet anything he was on the spectrum. And then just a few years later, someone pointed the spectroscopy at the sun, and they found an element that didn't exist anywhere but the sun, so they called it sunios. Oh no, helium, right? They found helium on the sun, and they said, oh, this doesn't exist on Earth. And the understanding of spectroscopy is what actually gave rise to quantum mechanics, right? I mean, the whole understanding of what radiation things give out when they're heated was first explained with quantum mechanics, and everyone said that can't be. But it gave rise to a whole branch of medicine because people looked. So normally in spectroscopy, you shine light in and you get like that. Or you shine light in and you measure on the other side. That would be called transmission spectroscopy. But our bodies are more like a cloud. We have water with an index of refraction of 1, and oils and tissue with an index of refraction of 1.4, meaning the speed of light is 1.4 times slower through it. And by alternating cells with water, tissue, we act like a cloud, and we redirect and we scatter light back. So light going into a cloud comes back white and in all directions. The same thing happens in tissue, and it's what's made actually, you think, oh, pulse oximetry, 2 wavelengths, figure how much of the blood is oxygenated, it's easy. It turns out you do it at the wrist and you shine light and you get it reflected back. It turns out to be really hard. It turns out you need 5 or 6 wavelengths to solve for that. And so we build a system that has multiple wavelengths to correct for the back scattering of light, for the scattering of light in this cloud-like substance, and we can pull out things like water, fat, bilirubin, the pigment of jaundice, hemoglobin, carboxyhemoglobin, what you get in a fire. We can pull out all sorts of things, even cholesterol can come out in tissue spectroscopy. So all you need is enough wavelengths, and you can start to solve for very many things in the body, and that's the secret. Lots of wavelengths, lots of measurements, and then it just falls out of the equations. We actually stole the original, what do you call it, algorithms for doing all this pulse at the wrist from the nuclear industry, where neutrons scattering all these different particles around in a field of matter. We just substituted photons for neutrons, and matter are just cells. And so the work was actually pretty well developed in the physics industry, just no one had ever applied it to optics in tissue. Mm-hmm. So there's, I mean, again, the reason there's all this stuff happening, I saw this stuff, but then hundreds and thousands of people came and built up my work. And that's to me one of the really cool things about science is scientists aren't afraid to chat, even when there are competing companies, and they talk and they share ideas, and that community is really an amazing community to be part of. So long answer.
We got another question from Ron Bill.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to ask, I think it's really amazing for all the work that you've been doing, all the discoveries you found, and all the inventions you made. They're all really amazing. And personally, as someone myself who goes to a lot of inventing, I think it's really cool. I would not even be able to understand a fraction, let alone even a piece of what you know. However, what I do know is that there are a lot of the issues that you have explained within your presentation, such as chronic illnesses like diabetes, high pressure, blood pressure, etc., are also problems of structural issues in society.
Absolutely.
Such as poverty, the way cities are structured.
Capitalism, and I'm not saying necessarily in a bad way, but the way we're incentivized to do services to fix things only after they've happened. We're not incentivized to prevent things. In fact, that's one of the things that Obamacare tried to turn around, to pay physicians for caring for a group to keep them healthier, not to pay for a group to order more services. Yeah, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, but I guess in your work, since you mentioned that yourself, how would you try to incorporate both the more technological aspect, but also keeping in a reminder that technology can only do so much, and it's like one part of the equation where it's like the post, what is it? I don't remember what the public health term was, but once you have the illness and then there's a prevention.
Yeah. So first of all, if there's anything I regret about life, it's my unbridled enthusiasm initially for technology. I think, the internet, oh my God, it's going to cure everything that's fake. And it didn't. It actually exacerbated it, right? And the same thing with data. When we first made the first band, we put it on our employees. And pretty soon we started seeing people's sleep times line up to the minute who weren't in relationships. And it was a little shocking to realize how powerful that data is. I mean, if you want to learn something about someone that you really shouldn't know, it takes very few pieces of data to do that. And here, I'm saying, let's go create terabytes of individualized data that's personalized, linked to your personality. I mean, so there's one issue about how much data is right to collect. And then it is, how do you use that data? And so, for example, at our companies, we hire behavioral health people who work very closely with nurses rather than doctors, because the nurses are trained to do that last mile of connection to the patient. They're the ones who think about, what can I ask them to do that they'll do? How do I motivate them? So there are parts of the health system that are dedicated to thinking about how you educate people, how you talk to people, how you incentivize them. And it's really critical that it's not the data and people like me who think about it only. It's really important to have public health, behavioral health, nursing, family experts, to basically think about how it impacts work and family in your life and do it right. And I think it's a really hard question, and everyone's working to solve that. But it's one of the things we think about a lot. I think it's a really good question.
Yes, another one in front.
So if you're sitting in this room getting ready to start a career after college, and you thought, I might not be neurotypical, where would you look for? What would you look for in a job or a career? Or would you skip doing a career altogether, start your own company right away? What would be your advice to me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, it depends on, look at the things that you find fun. And I don't mean like, sitting on a golf course, right? I mean, things that you could do that are creative, is it build housing? Is it, work for Doctors Without Borders? Is it solving how we live in space? What's the questions that interest you? And then think specifically, and I'm not making light of it, it's a hard set of questions. Think about what excites you. And I knew I was in school to learn things, but I kept coming back to I just want to invent stuff. And I didn't know, what do I do? That's pretty broad, right? So I just hoped I kept on learning to see if I'd stumble into something. And in the end, I did. But it wasn't because I had great planning. I just ended up in a place where there were really good questions. And I think I could have been happy in other places. The real key to the happiness was finding where I did things well, so that when I did things poorly, it wasn't taken to mean I shouldn't be there, which is kind of where I was for most of my, education years. It's like, how are you doing this? You're terrible. You should fail this class. And it's like, but I got 100 on the last test. It's like, I don't care. And so how do I get consistency, and how do I communicate what I do? And that was hard. That was harder than picking the field. Now, medicine came to me because, where can you stay in school longer than medicine? Really, right? I did college, and then I did 4 years of medical school, and then I did 2 years of health science technology, and then I did a biophysics fellowship, and then I did a residency, and then I did an intensive care fellowship, right? Like, I didn't get my first job till I was like almost 40, right? So it was a very long path, and so I could pupate over that path. Not everyone has that particular path. Choose from, you have to make decisions earlier. So follow your heart. The things that I followed that I loved are the things that stuck with me. Does that help? Also, a really good question.
Got another question. Senator?
As we all know, we live in a healthcare system that is for profit, and sometimes that profit incentive can come in front of actually providing the best or most accessible care. And being that you are a part of these two healthcare companies, how do you balance that both in needing to make money for investors as is necessary to just sustain that company?
So under the Healthcare Act, the Obamacare Act, there is a incentive to convert from what they call fee-for-service to fee-for-value. You can call it capitated care. There's all sorts of names for it. But the idea is to make the health team have a stake in the health, not the buildings of the patients. And it is a much maligned section because it turns out to be really hard to do. But there are a lot of companies that are working on it. But not just companies, governments that are working on it. And the people that are working in the field of fee-for-value capitated care are evangelists. They drink the Kool-Aid. They're not just doing it because it's another way to get paid. They're doing it because they believe the healthcare system is broken. And if you ask I'll start with physicians, what percentage of you plan to retire in the next 5 years? It is the highest number of any field ever surveyed. Right now it's running about 70% of clinicians want to retire in the next 5 years. Why? Because of all the broken incentives and the difficulty getting paid and all the burdens and all the paperwork. So people are really working hard to solve it. So one of the things I think about data is that take a test. But look at an iPhone. It replaced your stereo. Now you're not spending money on stereo. You are doing Spotify, and that's a different question and services. But you no longer buy this hardware. I think that what's going to happen is that what we do in medicine is going to become more and more data-driven and less physical test-driven. So that we're going to be able to pull out these digital biomarkers for what people have. And those markers, once they're validated, will be as good, if not better, than the test. Why? Because they're free. Once you run the test in data, you can run it again, right? So now you can start offering that as a service rather than a build test. And I think that's the direction it's going to go. It may take a generation because it's structurally hard to switch that quickly, but I do think that that's where it's going to go. I think it's going to go towards, you're doing the things that are going to give you this disease, let's treat it now, and the algorithms are going to find that, rather than you go for an annual test. I'm going to see a doctor November 9th. Why am I going to be sick? And when I go in, they say, why are you here? Well, you should know I'm here. You should have called me first. You should have found something and contacted me, not me contacting you. And I do think that's the direction it's going to go. And I do see when I talk to physicians, when I talk to health companies, when I talk to nurses, when I talk to patients, that's the direction that people are starting to move. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's happening now, just slowly. So I'm optimistic in that sense. Provided we don't crash the system and break people like we are, we're going to make that transition, and we'll look back and go, you're on dialysis, right? And like in the Star Trek movies, those be future doctors and people will be shocked at the brutal healthcare we have now. No, but again, I think that's the ethics question. That's what you brought up is where we should focus.
Yes, so we have a question.
Hello.
Yeah.
Like health tech products or companies are you really excited about outside of your own?
So let's talk about that privately, because I don't want to make it commercially oriented. But I do think the concepts of predictive care, not of managed care, like, oh, we're going to call you up and tell you what you should be doing, but predictive care with data that enables users. I love, for example, like what Apple Health did with Apple Health data set. It doesn't exist on their servers. It exists only on your phone. Your data is yours. It is federated at the edge of the big internet, but it's not part of some cloud at Microsoft or Azure or wherever. It's your data. And I think owning your health data and putting boundaries about how it can be used, first is essential to move to the next step, which is to gather more data, right? I mean, United Health just had a big breach through one of their services, one of their pharmacy services that leaked records on the majority of Americans. I mean, that's an astounding statement. And we just heard about it a few days ago. So there are some risks with how you manage data. And I think getting data ownership and data privacy rock solid, it's not that super interesting to do. There's a lot of very esoteric things in blockchain and whatever, but it's really vitally important to how we can protect the safety of our personal data. Look, I can go change my car if it's hacked. I can change my phone if it's hacked. But if my biometric data is hacked, that's me. I can't go back and change that. And so what do? I think that's a real risk that we have not yet fully solved, as indicated by the breach. But overall, separately, I think the companies that are trying to think about changing the way we develop drugs, taking an approach that's more holistic, thinking about longevity, medication, treating broadly disease before it happens using biomarkers. There's companies doing that, and some in the old fee-for-service way, and I'm less excited by that, and some really in a way to make healthcare more efficient and cheaper, and I'm really excited by those. That fair answer?
Question in the back.
Uh,
Yes.
question about, like, when you were talking about
you ask me what's the thing I'm most worried about in healthcare, it's the question you just asked. More than data privacy, it's what happens. Go back to 1960. Take the top 20% of people in the U.S. economically, socioeconomic, not just 1%, top 20%, and the bottom 20%. And there was a 3-year difference in median survival, 3 years. By 2000, that had widened to close to 10 years. Anyone want to guess how big it is in 2022, where we have the latest data? So, go ahead.
20 years.
It's more than 20 years. Actually, the gap is more than 20 years. The median person at the bottom of the health span eats high fructose corn syrup, eats at McDonald's, is not in a safe neighborhood to go running, and doesn't get the most modern and expensive medications approved. People in the top 20% are on statins, they're on the best ones, they're on metformin, maybe to lower their blood sugar, they have access to information, and the average woman in the US, in the top 20%, is living 88, 89 years, 64 versus 89. That's a quarter of a century different in life. And let me add, that is not a quarter of a century difference in health, because the people who die at 64 have diabetes when they're in their early 30s. The people that die at 90 never got it. So you're talking 20, 30 years. Okay, now, what happens to wealth? When you live 90 years, you have a house, it's accumulated in value, you pass it on to your next generation. Now you've got a, not a meritocracy, but an age-autocracy, right? People living longer, accumulating wealth, and the people that come and just only live 50 years, 60 years, can never catch up. And every generation, they're getting poorer, and they're getting less healthy. That is a nightmare, because that will lead to revolution. That will lead to social instability. You cannot support a society where the wealthy live forever. That's a science fiction, and the poor die as serfs working in their companies. And so I think it's incumbent on companies like ours to make sure that the data that we're giving is easily available, so that the lifestyle recommendations are things that anyone can do. Democratize that longevity. But right now, the companies that are offering services, $100,000 a year. I mean, who's going to pay for that, right? It's not anyone out of the top 10%. So those are the people who have it. I do think it will get more generalized. There's proposals that Ozempic is available to every person in the U.S. And the U.S. government just buys up the patent, and we issue it. And if we did that, it would change the health of this country more than almost anything I can think of. I mean, it's not risk-free. You get pancreatitis, you get some complications from these things. But it's a brilliant proposal. It was, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal, that it was proposed, just give it to everyone. And so there are people who are thinking about how to do that. That's just, it's government, it's institutional, it's at the drug company level, but people have to think about that before we get too much of a difference, because that will not be sustainable in a good way. Anything else on that? That's a great question.
No, thank you so much.
Another question, I think all the way in the back.
Yes, thank you. So it sounds like you met like a lot of really amazing people along your journey that helped you. And I was just curious if you had some advice for making these connections with the social barriers that come with being neurodivergent.
So for me, it made it easier. I just called them up. There was this brief period of time where everyone was on Twitter and you could just write to them. And Twitter was a good place to be. People answered you. I think it's going to get a little harder. Data is kind of the new gold, right? And so people are being less open about things. The social media is no longer a place to post everything you're thinking. Sort of the whole collaboration is getting harder. But I had a teacher that taught me literature in my first or second semester. I went to Davis. And she said, I want all of you to have a rejection letter by the end of this quarter, if we're going to pass. Or an acceptance letter, but we weren't good enough. And so I submitted some poems to the New Yorker, and I got this devastating reply, which just indicated they weren't happy about sending the mailing of sending them back to me. And you know, you just got to do it. It's nothing personal. You know, you fail 2,000 times to make the light bulb. It's just a step in making a light bulb. And so I think that most of the people I approached were actually flattered that I took the time to find them. This physician, this scientist, Britton Chance, he was just delightful. That I just went to his lab and asked. Like no one did that. And I think that's actually helpful. For me, one of the things I love about being in a company is that I have people who are a lot more social than I am, who make those connections and open the doors. I don't have to do it myself as much, but just don't be afraid. If there's someone you really care about, tell them that and write to them if you can get their address. It's not a guarantee that they'll respond, but I found that way more people responded, more than half, whenever I reached out, before I had done anything, and I was just looking for advice. Especially if you have something to share with them. I'm thinking of this, what do you think, right? Hi, this is a great way to start, but hi, I'm thinking about this, and I think you'd be the right person to talk to. That's a great way to start. But remember, you're taking advice from me already, people, and I sometimes give the wrong answer. There. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, this is great.
Yes.
By the way, this is my partner here in the head. It's so nice to have someone to spend journey on. I actually did not expect to have that. And so the fandom's just been above and beyond. May not be forever, but I hope so.
Yeah, there's a question, Schwab?
Do you think being a Korean has made you more approachable, like in a professional sense, to other people? Like, once you reveal something fun about yourself?
Yes, for me personally, I see groups of people in the valley, whether it be, and I'll say it disparagingly, tech bros or people who are more typical in industry. And hey, how about those Knicks? And I've always felt like I can't even say the words. But having sort of the life of being on stage, I got cast in music videos. That was a blast. I got to tell our CEO I can't come in because I'm flying down to Hollywood to be an extra in a music video. And it's like, what? And we talked about it. And so having things that are different is really a way that people will approach you to talk to you about it. So yeah, I think it's been great as a way of conversation to have things that I'm happy talking about that aren't just work. It's definitely made people feel more comfortable approaching me.
Cool. I guess if you don't know all the questions, I actually have a question for you. It's
I'm going to turn carefully so I don't knock something over.
It's a slightly more technical question regarding aging. So when you say age hard-coded into our cells, is that to say that the homeostasis that our body is trying to maintain is fundamentally flawed and evolutionary skills that actually provide us?
So I would recommend a book if you want to explain a little sciencey but not too sciencey. A book by David Sinclair. It's now maybe 4 years old, and it's called it's called I want to say it's called Healthspan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. But by David Sinclair. He's the head of the Aging Center at Harvard, and he talks about how each of these discoveries just blew people away. So there's a couple theories here. One is that we all started as this primordial slime mold, and it was sitting under the hot sun, and we learned how to reproduce. But the pools that just kept on growing and growing and growing and growing, no matter how much nutrients there were, no matter how much sun there was, or whether they were in a precarious place, all those pools died. What they needed was a way to switch out of growth mode and into a repair mode. And we can see this in our life. The repair mode is sleep. That's probably one of the reasons we sleep, is this 12-hour repair mode or 6-hour repair mode where you're not eating food. And so these two genes, the genes for growth, which are driven by nutrition centers, and the genes for repair, which are also driven by 24-hour clocks that run. I mean, our blood cells know what time it is. They actually have a circadian rhythm. All of these clocks then allow us to organize our life so we don't just use up all the stuff in the slime mold. And on top of that, God built these whole repair and growth pathways that ultimately have to do with aging. Inflammation is one of the things that drives aging. Inflammation gets turned off when you're fasting. It's probably one of the reasons intermittent fasting changes your profile so much. It's that your extra pathways get turned off. The opposite when you eat a pasta meal and you feel, that kind of just, I'm hot and I'm flushed. That's all inflammation. That's this giant load of inflammatory markers being released in your body. So the first thought is it was actually an evolutionary step that got depended on by too many things built on top of it. The other thought is that, hey, wait a second, if our cells keep on growing forever, then eventually they're going to turn into cancer. And if we don't have a way to limit the number of cell divisions and limit what happens, then eventually we're going to get cancer. And so the thought is the later in life you go, the more likely you're going to be that some of your cells are possibly cancerous, and the more that you switch into this mode where you're not repairing things and you're getting chronic diseases. And so it might be a timer that changes the weight from before reproductive age to after reproductive age that allows these things to start to fall apart in a way that won't make you die of cancer as often. And so it may be our own body's response, however flawed, to the threat of cancer. So the thought was, let's find out if all these anti-aging strategies lead to a lot of cancers. And so far the answer is no, they have not. And so it seems to be more of just the pathway was there, this sort of A-B set of genes, and then we built on top of it. And so by the way, yeast get old. If you feed them glucose every couple minutes, instead of feeding them once a day, they start to get senescent. They develop signs of old age. If you take white cells out of a 30-year-old and white cells out of an 80-year-old, and you put bacteria in front of them, and you check their epigenetic clock, these cells think they're 30 years old. These cells think they're 80 years old. They're both brand new. They both were made in the last week. They are brand new cells with a setting that says they're 80 and they're 30. And the 80-year-old cells kind of go, they don't fight the bacteria really well. And the 30-year-olds do. And then you take some of these anti-aging meds, and you go back to having 30-year-old white cells, just like that. They always could do it. They were just told not to. And that's just a fascinating concept. It's really, we're only about 10, 12 years into this pathway, but it's the most interesting thing I've seen come along in medicine. There's a lot of reading on it, a lot of writing on it, and it's actually pretty accessible right now. It hasn't gone too esoteric because there haven't been that many years of people working on it.
Thank you for your response. Yeah, I have no more questions. That's a good round of applause to scientists.